Viewers, our top story on India Global, it's official. His Holiness Dalai Lama is not going anywhere. It's a bombshell of a statement that comes just days ahead of his 90th birthday. The spiritual leader of Tibet and Tibetans world over has declared that the 600-year-old institution will continue after his death. Moreover, he has made one thing absolutely clear, which is that Beijing has no say whatsoever in this entire institution and the process. In fact, after years of silence, His Holiness has ended the guessing game, citing overwhelming appeals from Tibetans, both in exile and inside the Tibet that has been under Chinese control. He affirmed the Garden Phodrang Trust, not the Chinese government, that will have exclusive authority to recognize his reincarnation. Now, that's a clear, direct hit as far as China is concerned. Beijing insists that it alone can name the next Dalai Lama. That isn't the case. Now, Dalai Lama is the spiritual fountainhead of the Tibetan Buddhist sect the world over, which is why continuation of this tradition is so important for the people. Even as China has long said that it wants to appoint the next Dalai Lama. Now, this move by His Holiness is going to have a very strong impact in terms of ensuring that the tradition stays solely under the control of the Tibetans. But Dalai Lama isn't backing down. He says his successor will be born outside of China, slamming the door on Beijing's plans. Support for the decision spans continents, from the Himalayas to Mongolia, Russia, and even within Tibet itself. That's despite China's brutal crackdown on the Tibetan culture and religion that has continued since 1959. So while Beijing claims control, Dalai Lama just drew a spiritual red line, and it's the line the dragon cannot cross. Let's quickly now first play out this soundbite of His Holiness. We, of course, then go ahead with the big questions, as always.
공장 삼도 선거 추규 라전카다 배미서 배미천 제유탄대 마저로 고들지 겨우군지 균투 규미 결시 타수 최서인 시사와더 버거 디네 탄대 망소로 믹세 고들 저규 마소로 대베 롱을 주시인 추규하게 우치 라전나보다 배미 지수기 특수당 믹스 소재 전중당 숑진 멤버 소박하 히말라야 지기 전부 홀당 루스 공기 남베 유근.
The big questions on India Global today. First up, how soon will the trust clarify as far as Dalai Lama's succession plan is concerned? When can we have the next search being started and the date by when the next Dalai Lama could be announced? Second question, will China now announce its own successor? They've done so in the past as well. The earlier Dalai Lama, remember, he was nowhere to be found for the last 3 decades, and then there was these Panchen Lamas appointed by China as well. Will that entire circus go again once again? Well, we'll ask that as well. Second, the other question is, will this strengthen the Tibetan diaspora? To a large extent, the cause of Tibet is being supported by the Tibetan diaspora world over, including those that exist in India to a large extent. Will they get a fresh lease of life with the announcement of the next Dalai Lama? And lastly, what about the India-China relationship in the midst of this? Let's get in Brahma Chellaney for more on this. Mr. Chellaney, thanks so much for joining us on the broadcast. We put out the 4 big questions that I feel are very integral to understand this. Your take on, first and foremost, how do you see the announcement and the message that His Holiness is sending to China?
The Dalai Lama actually had published a book earlier this year in March. The title was Voice for the Voiceless. In that book, he said very categorically that the next Dalai Lama will be born in the free world. In other words, the Dalai Lama will not be born in Tibet. He is explicitly excluded Tibet. And I think that was a very clear and categorical statement from the Dalai Lama. It But more importantly, he had said previously that when he turns 90, around that time, he would clarify the rules of succession. Those rules are critical because there has been ambiguity from past statements of the Dalai Lama as to what the next Dalai Lama, where he should be found. But that issue has been clarified now. But he has also added confusion in terms of, for example, once he said that the next Dalai Lama could even be a woman. He once said that that maybe the Dalai Lama institution could die with him.
Yes.
But again, that part at least he's now clarified that this institution will continue. This is a 600-year-old institution. So some aspects have been clarified, but the actual rules as to how the successor is to be found,
yes,
those rules have to be clearly and unambiguously stated by the Dalai Lama.
Indeed, that has to be delineated very clearly, and possibly in due course of time we'll get details on that. Let me then ask you about the China factor. To a large extent, the Tibetan cause inside China has pretty much been stamped out by the brutal crushing of the Tibetan uprising in the last 70-odd years. But it's the legitimacy of Chinese sovereign control that the CCP really seeks. How do you see China's next actions with this announcement coming in?
China sees a compliant, state-appointed Dalai Lama as the final prize in subjugating Tibet. So it has a plan already for the day after Dalai Lama's passing away, and that plan is to install a pretender as the new Dalai Lama. For the Tibetans, this succession issue is an existential issue. After all, Tibet is under increasing repressive rule. More than 1 million Tibetan children have been forcibly taken away from their parents and placed into Mandarin language boarding schools. The whole idea is to wipe out Tibet's culture and identity.
Yes.
And in that larger plan, controlling the Dalai Lama institution, as I said, is the final prize that China is seeking to not only complete its subjugation of Tibet, but also to complete its control of Tibetan Buddhism.
Right. Final question then, Mr. Chellaney, which is around the fact that how do you see the India-China relationship in the backdrop of this? Because India does host the Tibetan government in exile. It hosts a very large number of Tibetans. How do you see the India-China relationship in the context of this?
First, China's determination to appoint the next Dalai Lama would be the equivalent of the Italian government appointing a new pope. It is as crazy as that idea. And yet, China is clearly determined to appoint the next Dalai Lama the way it has sought to capture the Panchen Lama institution by first abducting the real Panchen Lama and then installing a fake Panchen Lama. The problem is this, that within Tibet, the fake Panchen Lama, nobody recognizes him. He gets no respect. He's just a state appointee. To frustrate
Lani, as we speak, there's a statement that's coming from China where they've actually rejected what His Holiness has just put out, and the Chinese government has said that this next successor should be approved by the central government. Let's get those breaking flashes on our screens. Disha, let's get those flashes right there, which is that Dalai Lama's successor must be approved by the central government is what the official word has come in from China. So you see that this is a face-off that is going to escalate because China is not going to cede control so easily. In next coming days and months and years, you will see this escalating. Brahma Chellaney.
Well, to say that China will not cede control would suggest that China already controls the Dalai Lama institution. It has never historically controlled that institution. And what it's seeking to do now in the future would be a complete usurpation of Tibetan Buddhist traditions. a government has no role in religious matters. The US government and the US Congress both have affirmed this. In fact, there is a law, an American law, which threatens to impose sanctions on Tibetan officials that interfere with the succession issue. As far as India-China relations are concerned, we should not forget that India houses the vast majority of Tibetan exiles, and more importantly, India plays a central role in keeping the Tibetan language and culture alive, because while China is seeking to stamp out Tibetan culture and identity, it is the Indian government, the Indian taxpayers who fund Tibetan language schools and monastic institutions. They see, and Indian support is what keeps alive the unique Tibetan culture and identity. And India plays a very important role. And I hope
Absolutely.
that on the succession issue, India has a plan,
Absolutely.
to counter China's plan, because we should not be reactive. We should be proactive.
Absolutely.
And we should know that the succession issue is critical for India's own security.
It is. It is a very critical issue and affects India as well. And we're going to keep coming back to this story. Brahma Chellaney, really appreciate you joining us live on this story that we're breaking right here on India Global.